Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, as you know, they put the best sessions of a conference in the beginning and the end. So this is inching towards the best part of it. We only have 15 minutes to touch on this topic with the very big title, the fundamentals I learned about the green transition from building a nuclear energy startup over the last decade. And that looks somewhat like this. That's the product that we're building at Seaborg. Spent 10 years, took a lot of learnings, pivoted along the way. It didn't start looking like this, I can tell you. A lot of hardships, a lot of learnings about deep tech, fundraising, regulatory hurdles, technology risk, capital, etc. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Because that's a topic of a longer duration than 15 minutes. And hopefully, if I don't mess it up today, then they'll invite me again, and then I'll come talk about this topic next year. But no, we're going to talk about how's it going. And all these things I learned about the green transition and the fundamentals of it. Because it took me a long time to understand how the green transition is going, and there's definitely a lot of misconceptions. And that is somewhat the theme now, and also the discussion that's going to follow after this one is about the green transition. But I'll give you some answers, so you don't have to spend 10 years like me learning it. You can just use 10 minutes. But it's not fun if I just give you the answers, so I want you to help me give your view on it, and then afterwards I'll give you the answers. So we'll start here. If you get your phones out, because usually that's not kosher, you should keep your phones in your pocket, but you're allowed now. You scan the QR code, Mentimeter, or you go to menti.com, type in the code, and then you answer this very simple question. We have rewind the time 27 years, 1997. The topic is global energy production. How many percent did fossil fuels account for back in 1997? And while you answer that, then 1997 is an important year in many ways. One of them is that's because that's where we signed the Kyoto Agreement. The Kyoto Agreement where we set the net zero targets for 2050. That's very important. All right, getting some numbers in there. Somebody's way down there. I wish that was the case, but that is unfortunately not the case, but we'll wait a bit with the answer. Okay, so what are we at? Like 70, 80-ish% around there, and somebody says 100% also. So let's then fast forward to last year, if I can get this one to work. If you can switch to the next slide. Mentimeter bugs a bit sometimes. Can you switch it to the next slide up there? There we go. And then we start Menti again. So same question, but now it's last year. And of course, it's not this year because we haven't concluded this year, but same question last year. So in 27 years, how did we improve? How many percent did fossils account for? All right. So generally, we're thinking it's going in the wrong direction. Okay. All right. Generally, going in the wrong direction. And you're right in one sense, and you're wrong in another sense. So last year, it was 82% fossil fuels. 1997, it was 86%. So we have improved by 4 percentage points. But that's where it gets a bit tricky because that's 4 percentage points in relative terms. In absolute terms, it looks a lot worse. In absolute terms, we have increased fossil use by 55%. And I was kind of mind-blown when I saw this graph for the first time, which shows the world energy consumption over the last 200 years. Consumption and production. And as you can see, fossil fuels just dominate at 80+%. And we've added a lot of green energy, a lot, but all of it has gone on top. And that's another fundamental thing that took me a while to understand, is that you can keep adding energy, green energy, and it will just go on top. And that's because of another fundamental fact is that this is world energy consumption, 180,000 terawatt hours. You don't need to understand the intricate details of that, but that is for 1 billion people living with sufficient amount of energy. You and I are part of that lucky billion. The rest of the world's population live in energy poverty to varying degrees. So they will take any energy that they can get, whether that's black or green, and will continue to do. So we should continue to add green energy, but it will continue to go on top for a long, long time, at least until there's no more people living in energy poverty. So there's no green transition. There's just things added on top. That took me 10 years to understand. Hopefully that only took you a few minutes to understand by me conveying this very pessimistic message. But more fundamental facts is that the thing from before matters in the context of the green transition because of this. So the sources of emission, 70%-ish come from energy. And that has been pretty much stagnant. So we have agriculture, forestry, land use, waste, industry. All of those things also matter, but you need to pull the big levers. So you need to sort your trash, and it's important that the cap on my bottle does not disappear out into the ocean and all these things, but you need to keep the proportions in place that the big levers is also something that we need to move on. And that's energy if we want to move the green transition. And then this then ties into how the global greenhouse gas emissions on a yearly basis is going. And that's this graph here. That's from the latest IPCC report, which shows yearly emissions. And then it shows if we're going to go for Paris Agreement or 2 degrees, then we're down here. But the implemented policy, the nationally determined contributions range between 2.2 and 3.5 degrees. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor, I'm a super optimist, so I'm at 2.2 degrees. So if somebody says, you know, we're on track to 1.5, ask them, please, to explain how. Because things are going in the wrong direction. And if you look at the previous IPCC reports, then there is a trend, and the trend is that this gap continues to widen for each IPCC report. So the picture and the sound doesn't match. And there's an even more depressing graph than this one, but I didn't take it because, you know, that would be too depressing. That's called the Keeling curve, which shows the accumulated emissions over time. But you should Google that. That's quite important learning also, Keeling curve. But there's a much smarter guy than me that recently wrote a report on this called Václav Smil. He's written some brilliant books. Most of them I can recommend about energy, about statistics, about the state of the world. The report is called Halfway Between Kyoto and 2050, where he then looks at, okay, we're halfway now from Kyoto, 1997, and halfway to 2050, and how is it going? And what is realistic in terms of the green transition. Very recommended reading on your commute home, whether you're flying or not if you're driving, of course. I'll just keep going on these many different fundamentals that I learned. And this one is a very important one that a lot of people get wrong. Even energy journalist, I was seeing an article yesterday with the headline was misunderstood of what is energy and what is electricity. And there's a very big difference. Electricity is not the same as energy. So electricity is electricity, right? The things that drive this and the thing in your phone. Energy is heat and everything else related to that. So the 70% pie chart thing you saw, that has to relate to heat. So especially for industrial processes, fertilizers, cement, many different processes, cardboard, you name it, requires heat. That's not electricity. And the split is what we see here on this graph is 80-20 on a global level. So the graph here shows how much of primary energy, overall energy, is electricity. So I just picked a few different countries. I took the world average, down here, US, Europe, China, of course, relevant, Denmark, obviously, because that's where I'm based, and then Finland, doing pretty great, and Iceland is the best in the world. And there are some important facts in that is that Iceland has a lot of hydro, has a lot of geothermal, so it's very geographically specific, but more importantly, they're very small populations, 300,000 people. If there were more, then they would be like the rest of us. But it's important to keep in mind that electricity is not the same as energy. So when somebody mixes this up, make sure that you probe and ask, is it energy somebody's talking about, or is it electricity? And in Denmark, we're quite proud of all the wind energy, which we should be, and all the wind production that we have there, but we also mess it up time and time again. We think that a lot of our energy is provided by windmills, where it's only electricity, which is still good, but keep in mind, it's 1/5. And then another thing is energy density, which can become a bit complicated, but this is a very fundamental factor. And here you see different land use intensities for different energy sources. Land use could be one factor, but the fundamentals of it is that the more dense the energy is, the less resources, the less room, and the less impact it has on biodiversity. Wind is relatively awful wind energy density compared to petroleum, but it's still a lot better than using petroleum. And nuclear is by far one of the best energy dense sources that we have. And then one thing that's really bad, which we use a lot of in Denmark, is biomass. And I hear somebody laughing in the crowd. But the good thing about biomass is that it is perceived to be green. And that ties into the Kyoto Agreement, which was something that also took me a while to understand, is that the Kyoto Agreement defines that the source of emissions will land on the country which produced things, or chop down the forest in this case. So when we in Denmark use a lot of biomass, it's really great, because it does not weigh on our CO2 budgets. It weighs on Brazil and Eastern Europe and Canada, other places where we cut down the forest, not where we burned the forest. We'll keep going on these facts. Don't have too much time. So another one is green energy is not always present where it is needed. So this shows kind of where some of the demand centers are currently, and they will move, especially in the global south. And then they also show where are the most solar and wind resources. And that's important to keep in mind, because you might have seen this video meme thing on the internet, this small square of the Sahara that could, if we just fully pack that with solar panels, then all the energy needs, or electricity needs, remember, not energy, electricity needs would be solved for. But until we have superconductors and can transport electricity across the world without issues, then this is an important factor. The energy needs to be, and especially energy needs to be produced close to where it is being consumed. Otherwise, things don't add up. Availability and affordability will dictate demand. That's pretty fundamental, right? But energy is a bit special. So if we had abundant coffee and it was even more affordable than it is today, then there's still limits to how much we would consume. Not when it comes to energy. And that's where Iceland is a good example. So this is a pretty boring picture, but newly fallen snow, no salt, no gravel, and I can disclose to you that nobody has removed the snow on the pavements. That is floor heating. Outdoor floor heating. My father-in-law even does it on his parking lot at his house, so he doesn't have to shovel snow. That's what happens when you have not infinite amounts, but close to energy and electricity, which you do in Iceland. So availability and affordability would dictate demand in an entirely different degree in the energy sector than it will in the rest of our economies. All right, last one. What is actually clean and safe? This one surprises a lot of people, and it also did for me before I got into the nuclear industry some 10 years ago. There's a lot of things you could say about this one, about how good nuclear is, or wind, or hydro, but what's important to take away from this one is perspective. So a lot of times you talk about, should we have nuclear energy, should we have wind, you know, they kill the birds, etc. As long as we're burning 82% fossil fuels on global energy production, then it is without perspective to talk about how much this or that green energy source is contributing to this or that. You need to keep the perspectives and the proportions in mind when we talk about the green transition, because otherwise we will continue to do all these small things that will not move the needle, while at the same time we're burning off forest and fossil fuels like there is tomorrow, and we continue to be far off target for net zero and the green transition. That was a very long rant. Hopefully you learned more in 10 minutes than I did in 10 years. Thank you all.